You've probably seen it happen, right? A student seems totally fine one minute, and the next, they're in a full-blown crisis. It feels like it comes out of absolutely nowhere, and it can be really overwhelming. But what if I told you there's a predictable pattern behind it all? A kind of map? Well, today we're going to dive in and decode the hidden language of these emotional crises.
So, that's the big question we're tackling. What is really going on inside a student's brain and body when they have an outburst? Here's a hint. It's a lot less about defiance and way more about distress. Think of it like a medical mystery we're about to solve together.
And to make this super concrete, let's talk about a student named Sam. He's 16, and one day, his morning was, well, it was a mess. He had a tough time at home, arrived late, got penalized for it, and then, boom, this happened. A seemingly small thing led to this huge reaction. Sam's story is going to be our case study. It's the key to understanding the why.
Okay, so to start cracking this case, we have to begin with one single foundational idea. It's a total game changer for how you look at behavior, and it's our first big concept.
And here it is. This right here, this is the key that unlocks everything. All behavior is communication. Every single action, from somebody just fidgeting in their seat to, slamming a door. It's all a message. It isn't just random noise, it's a signal. The student is trying to tell us something that they just can't find the words for.
Okay, so if it's communication, what's it saying? Well, the source material tells us it pretty much always boils down to one of two things. First, there's some kind of mismatch. What the student needs and what their environment is actually giving them are clashing. Or second, and this is a tricky one, that problem behavior has somewhere along the line worked better for them than the appropriate behavior. The main thing to get here is that it's not about a student being bad. It's about them trying to solve a problem.
All right, so we've got our new lens on. Behavior is communication. Got it. Now let's get into the science. Let's pop the hood and see what's physically happening inside the brain that makes someone completely lose control.
So, to keep things simple, let's think of the brain as having two main players in this story. First, you've got your thinking brain. That's the prefrontal cortex. It's the logical, planning, cause and effect part of you. Then you've got the emotional brain, the amygdala. The best way to think of this one is as your body's super sensitive smoke detector. It's your alarm system.
So what happens when stress gets way too high? Well, that alarm system, the emotional brain, doesn't just ring louder, it completely hijacks the whole system. It floods the body with stress hormones and slams the brakes on the logical, thinking brain. This is what triggers that classic fight, flight, or freeze response. The person isn't choosing to be irrational, their rational brain has literally, temporarily gone offline. And that state, that's exactly what we're talking about when we say behavioral crisis. See, it's not a choice. It's a moment where a person's entire toolbox of coping skills has just been overwhelmed. It's empty. And that brain alarm system has grabbed the controls. Okay, so we know why it happens. It's communication. And we know the biological how, the brain's alarm system taking over. Now let's look at the actual pattern it follows. Because this isn't just random chaos. It's a journey, and it has a very predictable map.
And here it is, the map itself. We call it the crisis cycle, but you can really just think of it as an emotional roller coaster. It literally charts the rise and fall of emotional intensity over time. And understanding these different stages is the secret to knowing how to respond and, even more importantly, how to prevent that big peak in the first place.
So every ride has to start somewhere, right? For a student, that starting point is their baseline. This is just their normal everyday state. They're pretty comfortable, they're regulated, they can learn. And everyone's baseline is a bit different, you know? Some are chatty, some are quiet. The point is, this is their normal.
And then something happens. We call it the catalyst. This is the trigger, the spark, that introduces stress into the system. It's not always some big dramatic thing. For Sam, remember him? It was a whole chain of events. Oversleeping, missing the bus, being late, and then losing points. That was his catalyst.
And once that spark is lit, the roller coaster car starts that slow clack, clack, clack climb up to first hill. This is the beginning of escalation. At first, the signs are really subtle. Maybe the student gets really quiet or starts fidgeting. Their body is starting to react to that stress, even if they're trying to keep it together.
As we keep climbing that hill, the behaviors get more and more noticeable. The student might start arguing or refusing to do work, and this is really important. As the stress rises, their thinking brain is starting to go offline. Their ability to even understand language starts to shrink.
And then you reach the very top, the crisis peak. At this point, the emotional brain has totally taken over.
The thinking brain has left the building. Rational thought is just gone. This is where we see the big stuff, the yelling, maybe throwing things. For Sam, this was him screaming at his teacher and slamming the door. He wasn't thinking, he was just reacting.
You know, with any roller coaster, after that big peak, the ride starts to slow down. That's de-escalation. The student might get quiet again, they might withdraw, but it is so important to remember they are still flooded with intense emotions here, even if they look a little calmer on the outside.
You can imagine, after all that, the student is just wiped out. This is the exhaustion phase. It's like they've just run an emotional marathon. Their body has burned through a ton of energy. They might look sleepy or just need to be left alone to rest.
And finally, after some rest, we get to recovery. This is where the thinking brain finally plugs back in. They can start to think clearly, to reflect on what happened. This is the moment for teaching, for problem solving, not a second before.
So that's the whole ride, from start to finish. You've got the stable baseline, the catalyst that kicks things off, the climb through escalation, up to the crisis peak, and then that slow coast down through de-escalation and exhaustion, all the way back to recovery. It's a predictable path.
Now, knowing this map is amazing for when you're in the middle of a crisis. But you know what's even more powerful? Using it to prevent the crisis from ever happening. How do we keep that roller coaster from ever leaving the station?
And the way we do that is by focusing all our energy on that first stage, the baseline. It's all about proactive support. Things like building genuinely positive relationships with students, truly listening to them, creating environments that feel safe and structured. These aren't just nice things to do, they are the absolute foundation of crisis prevention. They build up a student's coping skills so that when a catalyst inevitably happens, it doesn't have to lead to a crisis. Which brings us right back to where we started, to that one core idea. When we see a student climbing that roller coaster of escalation, we can see it for what it truly is. Not defiance, not manipulation, it's a desperate attempt to communicate a need that they just don't have another way to express. So here's the thought I want to leave you with. It's about changing the question we ask ourselves. The next time you see a student exhibiting challenging behavior, instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" try asking yourself this: what is this student's behavior trying to tell me? Because the answer to that question, well, it changes everything.